Thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Invisible Trouble, Understanding Your Home's Chemistry with Corbett Lunsford. I'm Nikki Kruger, Building Science Manager for Santa Fe Freestanding Dehumidifiers and Ultra Air by Santa Fe Whole House Ventilating Dehumidifiers. We are proud to partner with Corbett to bring you this crash course on how your home is a living, breathing, and changing phenomenon. And a lot of what's happening around you is under the surface, invisible to our human senses. These dynamics might have huge effects on our family's health and well-being, as well as the health of the structure of itself. Today, Corbett will talk about what happens and how it affects us when we live, breathe, cook, and clean at home. For those of you who do not know Corbett and his wife, Grace, they have created the first TV series about home performance called Home Diagnosis, which airs on public TV across the U.S. They have posted over 500 YouTube videos and 80 interviews for the Home Performance podcast. In addition, the Lunsfords are home performance testing experts who also train professionals through their building performance workshops. Before handing it over to Corbett, I just wanted to let you know that you can ask questions by using the comment box located up in the right-hand corner with the question mark. Corbett will be answering these questions at the end of the presentation. And with that, Corbett, take it away.
Thank you very much, Nikki. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Nikki is a technical expert, so she might be answering some of your questions if they're answerable by her, but she'll save some of them for the end. So please do, I'm going to, as usual, give you the fire hose treatment. So as you have questions, just type them in furiously or just make little notes and I'll be happy to expound on things later. This is part 2 of 3 of this series. Part 1, which I heartily recommend that you go back and watch if you were not there for the initial webinar, is about how professionals can tune the systems of the home to deliver a healthier product. This one, we're going to get into why we should care about this topic at all. So this is going to be a little bit freaky. It's okay. In part 3, which is in 2 weeks from now, and do register for that because that's free as well. That will be about the solutions, the specific solutions and how exactly to implement them. So let's go ahead and dive in. The first thing that we all need to know here is that what we reviewed from last session is that there's this whole world of invisibleness that is happening around us all the time. And the most important thing that you need to understand is that when you are dealing with the dynamics, not just the static stuff that you're looking around your house and you see like, oh, there's a fan over here, there's lights, there's a camera for making a TV show over here. Those things are all interacting with each other. They might seem like they're very static and that they're one at a, you know, one's over here, one's over there, but they really have relationships with each other. And all of this comes down when we talked about indoor chemistry to one word. That's an important word for you to know. You're not going to be using this on a daily basis because it's a weird word. It's called redox. This stands for reduction oxidation. This is a process, and it underlines the dynamic nature of what we are talking about in the indoor space. Reduction oxidation is basically a transformative process where two different molecules or chemical compounds exchange electrons, and it's between two different species of chemicals. This is evident when you sit around a campfire. You're looking at the campfire, you are seeing redox at work. When you watch a rocket take off into outer space, that's the most intense version of redox, also a bolt of lightning. But there is another version which is much slower and much lower temperature, and that is what is happening in the air around your face right now. The air around you is on fire, technically speaking. But it's too slow and it's too low temperature for you to see the flames. Nevertheless, it is happening around you. So let's dive in. If you were there at the first time, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that 78 years, the average life expectancy of a human being in America. 70 of those 78 years, you're going to spend inside of buildings. 50 of those 70 years in buildings, you're going to spend inside your own home. So this redox process, this dynamic that is happening around you that we're largely not aware of at all until we start paying attention to it, is going to impact the way you live, your quality of life, your health, the health of your children, much more importantly. Let's just kind of not talk about adults anymore. We're all dead. I got my vaccine yesterday. I'm very proud. And it feels like a new beginning, a chapter closed. But I'm a grown up. Like, I've got so many toxins in my body from all the stuff that I've eaten since the 80s that it's like, let's not talk about me. Let's talk about kids. So I'm going to couch a lot of stuff about this towards my kids. My kids are 3 and 5, and we're about to have a new baby. Every home is a system. Just as a quick review, we got physics, we got chemistry, we got microbiology. What we're talking about in the home performance field is melding all these things into one thing that we can understand and try and tune together. Just so you've got it, here is a quick slide of the breakdown, the fundamental science behind the physics and the home chem sides. The home chem is the chemistry and microbiology, which are very closely linked to each other. I'm not going to talk about this. I just wanted to show you. This is what you can understand if you want to. Now, here is the house that my family built. And when I say my family, I mean me with my mom and dad's help, and toured around the country. I'd never built a house before. I had to learn how to use a nail gun. We toured 7,000 people through this house and showed them what a high performance home, what a performance tuned home can smell like and sound like and feel like. They listen to my HVAC system. It makes no sound. They smell the house while they're looking at my 2 cats, and they know there must be a litter box in the house somewhere. Can't smell litter or poop. We got all kinds of other disgusting stuff in there, and we cook with gas inside that house. We lived in that for 5 years until we moved into this house that my family has just finished, and I'm in my training center right now. And so if that house has less than 2,000 cubic feet of air contained within its super airtight structure, and each adult breathes about 500 cubic feet per day. If we add 2 cats, 2 kids to that, you could assume that everybody in that house, when we were living in there, would breathe all of the air that it contains every day. We'd run out of air in 1 day. It did not happen, and in fact, it didn't smell like a dirty sock or anything disgusting because we just tuned this stuff. So if we could do it in that very tight space, which by the way, tiny houses, much more difficult to control the home chem in than a normal sized house, then you can do this. So don't worry about what I'm about to tell you. It's okay, we'll fix it. First of all, just another review. Nobody is regulating this stuff in our homes because this is America and you're supposed to be allowed to do whatever you want. That's not a really good idea. It's like me as a 19-year-old being allowed to choose what my major is made up of in college. That's like a terrible idea. 19-year-olds should not be allowed to do that stuff. Homeowners should not have to understand all of the chemistry that I'm about to lay out for you and then worry about all the homework that you need to do online to further educate yourself. That should not be your job. We really should have this be regulated so that we can sit back and do things that we like doing. We're not there yet. We'll get there. So the Homechem Experiment is where I learned about a lot of this stuff. I did not always know about this. In fact, I didn't always know about houses. I used to be a musician for a living for dance companies. So like everybody, let's raise our hands. Repeat after me. Sometimes I am an idiot. It's okay. All right. So all the professionals, all the engineers, all the homeowners on this call and watching on the YouTube channel later just did that. It's okay. There's no dumb questions. Please ask whatever you want. We both did not like chemistry in high school, but we got great teachers through this Homechem Experiment, which was a Sloan Foundation funded project. It involved 63 PhDs or people in the process of getting their PhDs from 13 different universities in the States and Canada, I believe. They brought in, like, I bring $20,000 of test instruments into my clients' homes. They brought $4.5 million of stuff. It actually was too big to fit inside of the house that you see there. They built these trailers around. They brought in trailers and parked 4 single-wide trailers around this double-wide trailer so that they could house all the instruments so it wouldn't overheat the house and interfere with all the measurements that they're trying to do. And what we did was 1 month of testing in both sequential and in layered states. So you can see the schedule right here. It was very interesting. The most interesting stuff was the Thanksgiving days, the purple squares. There were only 2 of those. That's where we cooked all day long. And I say we because Grace and I, as you can see, were there. This is us in the bottom right-hand corner filming, and there's the Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving Day, we cook for like 6 hours using all the burners and the oven. And then invite 30 people over and we all eat and then we clean the house. And that was very interesting, chemically speaking. This was really important because nobody, like we've been studying indoor chemistry for a while. There have been lots of people who are making great strides in this, but they didn't have the equipment, the $4.5 million of test tools. They didn't have the money. And this was, again, funded by the Sloan Foundation, which is like an independent, they're not an industry group. They're not trying to prove anything. They just want to kind of explore what's going on. So they're still mining through the data on this. It's pretty incredible what they're coming out with. What we basically need to understand from this is that, number one, chemicals are everything. There is no such thing as chemical-free anything. That's either naive or lying if somebody said that they're trying to sell you something that's chemical-free. What they might mean is synthetic chemical-free, but of course, natural chemicals aren't all good for you either. Asbestos is a natural chemical. Cocaine is a natural chemical. They do pretty weird things to your body. So chemicals can help you or they can hurt you. So all you need to do to keep this straight in your mind is to control what chemicals are brought into your home and created in your home. And this is the thing about chemicals that's really interesting. We got chemicals that you have in your home that are built in, right, from the building materials that we use, or the groceries you brought in, or the clothes that you had dry cleaned. And then we clean, we introduce other chemicals, or we open a window and ozone comes in from the street outside. And those chemicals make new chemicals that were not there to begin with. And this is so pivotal to understand because there is basically no way to model or predict what chemicals you're going to have in your house. So this is kind of, you can try to control the chemicals, but you're also going to be making stuff whether you like it or not. It's very interesting. We're going to talk about it. Number two, particles are always bad to breathe. Therefore, we want to make sure that we control them. And by the way, remember that they're always being created in your home. We are chemical factories. I'm going to talk about this. Not chemicals, excuse me, particle factories. So you want to control how many particles are being created and where they are going. Number three, microbes live at home with us. There are all kinds of millions of different creatures in this room with me right now, and on my skin and inside my body. Right, one of the researchers at Homechem said that she doesn't think of herself as an individual. She thinks of herself as a planet, and she has millions of creatures living in and on her, and it's an ecosystem, right? So the microbiome can be good for you or it can be bad for you. Again, moderation, right? So genociding your microbiome is not the answer. We're going to talk about this too, because we are part of the problem here. Because antimicrobials that we're buying and putting on our hands for the last year as we're stuck at home in this pandemic and freaked out about bugs, they introduce more chemicals. What do we think we're adding to our hands when we add Purell, right? It's chemicals. So now we've got more chemical reactions that are spawning new baby chemicals, and now we're full circle again. So what you can think of is a room that is like a party or a restaurant or a conference, and there's a bunch of chairs in the room, and there are people, a bunch of people, and they're standing up and sitting down, and they're kind of doing that. And then some people leave, and more people come in, and maybe you go and you buy something and you bring more chairs in. The chairs are the surface areas in your home. So we could think of countertops, any surfaces that you would like put things on, but also all the sideways surfaces, all the intricate that you got, like decorative furniture with all the kind of crazy ornamentation and the carvings and all that stuff. Each of those surfaces is a place for a chemical or a particle or a microbe to sit down on. And then when they stand up, that's them ejecting into the air. And basically, it's important to understand that if you're in a room, and especially inside, because we've got a lot more surface areas inside than outside. That's the main difference. All of those things are taking turns standing up and sitting down based on a bunch of different factors. And so thinking about it that way kind of helps with your control of it, which we're going to again talk about in the next webinar, part 3. Homechem is a system. So when you're looking at a room in your house, and this is again my tiny lab, first of all, you need to remember that contaminants are present in materials, on surfaces, and in the air. More humidity that you're going to have inside of a room, the more emanation of all of those things is going to be happening into the air. And the air is where we really want to control for this, because breathing something is different than touching it or eating it. So if it's in the air, that is particularly a nuisance for us. The more humidity you have, the more microbes grow. You can remember grow vegetables without any soil at all. As long as you have light and water, which is called hydroponics, you can grow crazy amounts of things. They have some of the biggest farms in the world are in Saudi Arabia, apparently. And remember, the last thing that's review from last webinar was that there is more pollution indoors at certain points, which we're going to touch on, than outdoors. And everybody's talking about the pollution outdoors most of the time. Pollution is a big health risk. but the indoor pollution risk is much higher. So the chemical villains that we have that are built into products, let's talk about these. The chart that you see here that's 1 through 6 is an approach that was developed by a woman called Arlene Bloom, who is an amazing person. You can see an interview with her on our YouTube channel. You can also see her TED Talk. 6 classes of chemicals so that you don't have to think about like all the millions of, and it's not millions necessarily, but like tens of thousands of chemicals that we're talking about here in each one of these classes. You kind of, this is a better way to categorize it. So first of all, we've got highly fluorinated chemicals. You can see a picture of a raincoat. So this is anything that's waterproof or stain resistant. Can you think of anything in your house right now that is waterproof or stain resistant? First of all, you got your raincoat hanging up inside. That is bringing highly fluorinated chemicals into your house. If you look on the ingredient list of something, if it says fluoro anything, that's one of these chemicals. They're called forever chemicals. There's no known way to destroy them, to take them back apart. Antimicrobials is class number 2. These are things that are specifically about trying to sanitize your space. And this is on the list because it's not good. It's a bad thing. All of these things are bad, just to be perfectly clear. Now, we have had to be using some of these in the last year. If you couldn't wash your hands with soap and water, the next best thing, because of course you don't want to get COVID and then get a stroke later because of all the weird things that it does to your body, is to use some hand sanitizer. Like, okay, that's cool, but remember, moderation. Third thing is flame retardants. In the 1970s and 80s, they had a bunch of rules about, oh, you can't put these chemicals, which back then was called chlorinated tris, into kids' jammies as flame retardants, because we don't want kids to catch on fire, but we also don't want to introduce these chemicals that cause genetic mutations and cancer in children that get into their bodies and live inside their cells. Gross. So, of course, they didn't just say, okay, we're not going to make that anymore. They had a bunch of factories that were making this. What they decided to do is put them instead into electronics. So if you bring a DVD player or anything like that into your house, a computer, it has these flame retardants built into it. And of course, they're going to off gas into your space. And also foam insulation. That's both spray foam and rigid foam, and also foam that's built into your furniture. There are ways to get around buying something that's got these things in it, and you would want to look at the label, which of course is what we're getting at here. Bisphenols and phthalates, if you think about something called BPA, which they advertised in your water bottles, like, oh, this bottle has no BPA in it, that's bisphenol A. Those are very useful because they turn plastic into something that's workable. They make it either softer or harder. And so PVC, vinyl, has these bisphenols and phthalates in them. Vinyl flooring, I'm going to say right now, just avoid it. Don't do it. It's not worth it. The phthalates that come out of that thing come out for decades and decades. Very interesting chemistry. The last 2 classes here are certain solvents and certain metals. And the metals that we're talking about are elemental metals like cadmium, arsenic, things like that, lead, mercury. You probably know that those are bad for you. They are in stuff though, like smoking has cadmium. It introduces cadmium into your environment. We just don't like, this is getting a little deeper probably on the chemistry side than what we're typically doing on TV. So aside from the chemicals that we're focused on, we also want to talk about chemistry. And the difference between those two is what I mentioned before, where we bring chemicals in and then they have babies together. And that process of making new chemicals is what we call chemistry. So this is all about the things that you bring into your house that are going to accelerate, that are going to become reactive and create more babies. And again, that is something that you can't predict. We could just try and not bring lead and cadmium and arsenic and bisphenols and vinyl and blah, blah, blah into your house. But then, of course, no matter what you bring in, there's going to be babies made, and those are hard to predict. So first of all, never, ever let anyone you know buy an ozone generator, something that is called an ozone generator. And there are other things that generate ozone, and I'll get to in a second, but any one of the 300 things that you could buy on Amazon right now that's called an ozone generator should be outlawed. But of course, nobody's regulating this stuff because we don't care enough for them to do that, to stick their neck out and risk making a bunch of manufacturers mad. So ozone generators, not good. Anything that is an air cleaner that is more than just a fan and a filter. And one of the things, of course, when we start talking about ventilation, we're going to talk a lot more in part 3, but if you're going to get something that's an Ultra Air or a Santa Fe piece of equipment, which is why we partner with them for both our television show and for this series, is not going to have anything more than a filter and a fan. They'll have things that can dry the air, which is really nice, and it might warm the air or cool the air depending on what kind of piece of equipment you're talking about, heat pumps and things like that, that you're affecting the physical properties of the air. Great, got to do that. But anything that's going to try and destroy or eliminate or any of those catchy marketing terms really run the other direction, because it's going to make a lot more reactive stuff in your house that generates ozone. And if we have time at the end, I'll talk about how we know it's going to generate ozone and how not to trust necessarily the test data that they're going to show. It says it generates just a tiny bit. Chlorine-based cleaners. I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm going to tell everybody on our television show when Grace and I release season 2 in September, just avoid chlorine-based everything. Don't have it in your house. And that goes for dishwasher detergent, clothes washing detergent, anything like that. Just if you can, don't use it, because it just introduces a lot more chemistry than other kinds of cleaners. Cooking with gas. This is supposed to be a good thing, right? That means that you're doing great. You're really kicking butt. Cooking with gas. Cooking with gas is actually not really where it's at anymore. We know now that we've got NOx, nitrogen oxides, that are created when you cook with gas. When you cook with other fuels like electric or induction, you're not creating this. If you have a gas-fired water heater, you shouldn't have the NOx that is created 100% come inside. But of course, that can happen also, and that's a topic of a totally different webinar series. And scented products. And these aren't bad in and of themselves. If you smell anything, it's probably a VOC, but so we like smelling things. That's not bad. And in fact, I'm going to talk about more about VOCs in a minute, but the main thing that they do is they're a tinder for these chemical reactions. So if you have scented products and then you clean with anything, or you mix, you got Axe body spray over here and you got something else over here, they're gonna, man, those things are gonna have babies. So these scented, specifically, products are going to induce more chemistry. They're gonna make your home more reactive. We all live in a chemistry experiment, and we are the chemists that are adding things every day. So VOCs, let's talk about this for a minute, because this is something that is widely misunderstood. Volatile organic compounds. Organic means that it's got a carbon bond in there somewhere. Compounds means it's several different molecules that are adding up together to make one thing. And volatile means that it has evaporated. So it's not in the liquid or solid state, it has become a gas state. We breathe air, air is a gas. Almost anything that you can smell is going to be a VOC. You can smell, if you smell like smoke, part of what you're smelling is little bits of carbon that have been, charred stuff, and you have some receptors for that. But the VOCs can be good. Pizza is a VOC. If I smell a field of flowers or a pine forest, those are VOCs. VOCs are not always bad. They can be good also. We are probably the main emitters of VOCs in our homes. So when we talk about avoiding VOCs, avoiding the scented products, we're like really focused on, for example, paint in this example. Let's have VOC paint, VOC free or low VOC. They're substituting the VOCs in there for something because they had a purpose. They're not adding ingredients just for no reason. So if we're going to avoid these VOCs in paint, we also need to have no scented products, like if you're going to be consistent about it. So I would say don't worry too much about the VOCs as like a fundamental rule of things to avoid because of this regrettable substitution thing. We all get upset about BPA, they put BPS in. We get upset about VOCs in paint, they put SVOCs, which are semi-volatile organic compounds. That means that they take a lot longer to evaporate than the VOCs did, which means that now I'm going to be exposed to these chemicals over a lot longer time. Interesting trade-off. And by the way, your nose is actually a better VOC detector than a lot of VOC detectors that you can buy as a consumer nowadays. Particles. Okay, so this is my daughter telling us that we are actually to blame for most of the particle generation in our home. Every time you cook in your house, you're creating particles. Every time you clean or vacuum, you're ejecting particles into the air to be able to be breathed. And remember that particles are always bad for us. There is no such thing as a safe level. If you are in your house, just sitting there, you are creating particles. Ah, it's terrible. And the last thing is if you move around. Okay, is anybody planning on doing any of this stuff in their house? I hope so, because this is what homes are for. So here, we just need to understand that our homes are places where we are creating dangerous stuff. There are side effects to us living and being in our space and doing the things we like to do. Therefore, all we have to do is just recognize that and then take steps to clean up our own mess, just like you would pick up the trash off the sidewalk that you dropped. When you cook, here is exactly what is happening. If you use different types of fuel, as I mentioned, cooking with gas is going to create NOx. If you cook for a longer amount of time, Thanksgiving is that main experiment that I was talking about, the Homechem Experiment. If you're cooking like Indian food or Chinese food, or if you cook African food, or the different styles of the actual implements that you're using, and the activities that you're doing, while stir frying is a super high heat and super high activity type of cooking, you're going to be creating more or less particles depending on that. The amount of burners you're using, right? Again, Thanksgiving. And even if you're using a toaster or a panini press or a griddle, I put those things on top of my stovetop to use so that I can turn on my range hood, because all of that stuff creates these particles, and a lot of them are these very, very fine particles. When you clean and you vacuum, what we are doing here is introducing chemical compounds into our space, because Americans, let's be totally honest, do not trust cleaning with water. If you take a sponge, you get it wet, and then you wipe a surface, you're going to have the 10 people who are watching you do that are going to be like, hey, why don't you actually do your job instead of just pretending to clean something? By the way, they clean with water and some mild soaps in lots of countries around the world. So let's not be too superior about that. The second thing is that when dust and chemicals are on surfaces, they're perfectly safe because they're not in our breathing space, right? When they're sitting on a surface, when they're sitting down in those chairs in that room, we like that. That's good. You want to capture them while they're there. So if you vacuum, then you pick up all that stuff and you're ejecting it through this high-powered vacuum into the air where now your children can breathe it. And if you're a dog person, then your pet can breathe it. Let's talk about whoever is going to be the most vulnerable in your space. You got anybody who's pregnant, who's a child, who's a smaller person or a pet, or who is ill in any way, then this is going to be a problem. So you need to make sure that your vacuums are HEPA. I just ordered a dust buster and I got a HEPA filter on that. It's not that hard. So being and moving, here's the mechanics behind this. By the way, my wife pointed out that apparently 2 of the people in this picture have tongue studs, which I think is hilarious. So I kept it in there. We shed particles. We shed skin particles, to be specific, and we shed about a pound a year. Over the course of your 78-year life, that's about a half a person, right? If you were to pile them all in one place. So that's kind of gross. Don't worry about it too much because it's a thing that happens. But when you use personal care products or you have a gym inside your house, you're going to create a lot more particles. And then, of course, with the personal care product, chemicals being introduced, you're going to start maybe making some babies that deposit on those particles. So when we talk about particles, which are also called aerosols, you'll hear scientists use these 2 words interchangeably. All it means is you get little blobs of solid or little liquid droplets, and they're small enough that they can just float around in the air. So that's all it is. You got a couple different sizes. You got big ones, PM10. A human hair, by the way, is 100 micrometers. So we're talking about PM10 being a 1/10 of a human hair. 10,000 nanometers is another metric that you think of here. Again, a human hair, 100,000 nanometers. If you have a problem with large particles like that, you're breathing a lot of them, what you'll experience is upper respiratory stuff. You get coughs, you get sneezing, you'll get sinus troubles. If you have smaller particles, these are going to be a 40th of a human hair, 2.5 micrometers or microns. Then you're going to have lower respiratory systems. You're going to have, coughing, like productive coughing, and stuff where you just feel like your respiratory system is not working right. Pneumonia is going to be a lower respiratory issue. And then nanoparticles, which are the ones that are like in the single digits or double digits of nanometers, those are going to go all the way down, travel in. There's this kind of sweet spot of particle size, and they'll go into your lungs, hit the lining of your lungs, and transfer straight through, just like oxygen does, and live in your body. They will go into your cells, and then the cells in your body have little trash cleaners. I can't remember if it's called the mitochondria what. But anyway, these things don't recognize these chemicals that we're talking about that might be that small, and the particles that are that small, and so they might never take out the garbage. They might say, oh, that's probably supposed to be here. So the thing that you really want to underline all of this with is that when you have major pollution problems, the main health outcome of that is not going to be respiratory. It's not like, oh, I'm going to develop lung disease, or I'm going to have a chronic cough or something else. It's cardiovascular. Heart disease is actually, like, that's the #1 thing in this country. Where does it come from is the question. We might say, oh, it's hamburgers or it's genetic or whatever, but we're not doing autopsies on these people to find out. We know through studies of statistics that air pollution is actually just as deadly. It is the cause of as many deaths per year in the United States as traffic accidents. Isn't that fun? So your first step might be, oh, I'm going to go get a particle sensor for these particles that I know are bad. And then we'll talk about like the VOC sensors, which I already kind of shot a hole in. The particle sensors that you're going to buy, first of all, don't count particles. They weigh particles. And if you think about particles as a picture like this, where you got huge blobs, the big PM10, right? Particulate matter that is 10 microns. That's going to be the giant blobs, big boulders and droplets. You got little tiny ones that you can barely see. Those are the nanoparticles, right? So the nanoparticles are not going to be picked up by these sensors because they weigh. They're going to see that you've got a giant blob, but they're not going to pick up all the tiny ones because it just doesn't have that much mass. So when you use your stovetop, your toaster, or your oven, you are creating these tiny particles, and they will not be picked up by these particle sensors. You might feel like everything is fine. And your nose, don't forget, is just as reliable, but we have something called sensory fatigue, which is when you are smelling something, and then after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and we've all had this happen on a bus or on, at a street fair, you'll smell something and you'll be like, ew, but then after 10 minutes, you can't smell it anymore. And it's because your brain has just kind of blurred that out and said, okay, you don't need to know that anymore. I know that you've smelled that. So it's not necessarily that reliable. Now, as far as the microbiome of the home goes, what we are looking at here is that there are these millions of animals in our space that are living and working and breathing and excreting. This really interesting interview that we're going to release on our YouTube channel with a guy named Rob Dunn, who's the author of a book called Never Home Alone, is talking about how fungus, if you look at the tree of life on a piece of paper, fungus and human beings are so closely related that you literally can't tell them apart when you look at the whole of life, like in a picture this big. So these things are here. They are our cousins, technically speaking, even though that's really weird to think about. And they're doing their jobs. They're like living their life and having babies and all that stuff. Something is going to be doing that with us. And so if you use something that eliminates 99.9% of the life on a surface, what you have done is take away the vast ecosystem that was there, and you've only left the nastiest, toughest, most hard to kill animals who are still going to be living, working, breathing, and excreting and having babies. And now you only have those guys to deal with. This is one of the problems that we've been finding with antibiotics and with sanitizing solutions, that it's just like not leaving us with a good ecosystem. So as far as marketing goes, you want to be really careful about this, because when you go out and you start trying to use what we're talking about in this webinar to make better choices in your life. And remember that there's a third part to this webinar series, so please do tune in for that in 2 weeks. There are people who know that you are looking for this stuff because sustainable or like chemical free or toxin free or healthy. And also now we've got a whole bunch of people, a huge segment of society that's getting something called environmental sensitivity or multiple chemical sensitivity, MCS. They want to sell you stuff. And so even in a used, like this is from Craigslist, I'm pretty sure. I was looking for rugs and I found this ad and I was like, this is too good. I got to pull it down. 2 years old, good condition, crafted from antimicrobial and stain resistant, right? I hope that you would see that and know that those are 2 things that are on our list of 6 classes to not bring into our home. And then they go so far as to say, safe for spaces with kids and pets. And people are allowed to say whatever they want. So please do be careful about that, because are a bunch of ads that I keep getting when I'm scrolling through social media of things that destroy molecules in my space, whether it's in my house and it's a big unit, or in my car and it's a little tiny thing I plug in. It's very nice. Good for you guys for like inventing that. Nobody should have that in their house because of all of the side effects that it's having, and that's the underlining, foundational understanding of home performance is that in the science of your home, everything has side effects. You start messing with something and it's going to have repercussions and echoes across your whole system. So don't buy that. Also, we want to be careful about reuse. So when you are trying to be green, and remember that the triangle of reuse, reduce, and recycle, that's very nice, but reusing products that you're bringing into your home that are going to be in your potentially very airtight house or apartment or yurt, and it depends on how well you'd have to build that yurt, does not mean that you're going to have a better life, because the chemicals and the particles that are going to be introduced into your space, and also potentially the microbiology that you're bringing in, is maybe going to be weird. Because if you think that by buying a baby mattress, and I hope that those of you who have pregnant friends right now are like tuning into what I'm saying, you buy a baby mattress that's 20 years old, thinking, oh, it's going to have off-gassed all of its nasty stuff, and then I'll just be getting the chemical-free version of what it was manufactured to be. It's going to have chemicals built into it because it was built 20 years ago that are outlawed now. So buying something that was older does not mean that you're safe from it. It's not like, oh, I'll just wait for all this, the off-gassing to happen. You got to understand that that's kind of the nature of the manufacturing industry. And my tiny house and this house have no reused materials in them because I have no idea what the person who had them last did to it. They might have soaked it in something. When we were in Chicago, the streets, you'd look down on this one particular street. I had a friend who used to give bike tours, and he'd say, look down, cobblestones. And we were like, yeah, cool, cobblestone street, but they're not cobblestones. That's wood. They're wood timbers that they sunk lengthwise into the street to make a nice thick base. And they soaked them to preserve them and make sure they didn't rot in creosote, which is flammable. So when the Chicago fire happened, part of it was because we had all the streets were soaked in chemicals that are flammable. Kind of interesting. So just be careful about bringing other stuff into your house that might be reused. Now, in the next session, remember, we're going to talk about healing all of this stuff. Healing your home chem. The 3 basic rules that we want to talk about are, number 1, don't bring bad stuff home. I hope that you picked up from this session that you cannot do that 100% of the time. Just by being in your space, you're going to be emitting particles. Just by having a home that's an indoor space that's got kind of a controlled environment, you are going to be having microbes live with you. And also bigger stuff, bugs, and depends on how airtight your house is. This house being super airtight, not very many bugs get in here. And then also you are going to be introducing chemicals into your house because you bring home groceries and personal care products and products to furnish your house with. And then those are going to be interacting and making new babies. So number 1, you can't, that's try, but you can't do that. So the second thing to do is always ventilate. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in the second session. And then keep it dry, because of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, the more humidity you have in your home, especially if it's spiking up and down in an uncontrolled way, which right now, like we're in Atlanta, and it's a beautiful day outside, but it's going to be 80% relative humidity. And if my house can't control its own humidity, then we have a major problem. And this is why partnering with manufacturers who have been really focusing on trying to make the best, most efficient drying machines possible is why we have Santa Fe partnering with us on this series, because we need more machines that dry stuff out. It's just unavoidable. Basically, every house that's being built today must have, according to many of us, a dehumidification machine that can just make sure that no emergencies happen. So at this point, we'll go ahead and turn it over for questions. I'm happy to elaborate on some of the things that I talked about earlier, especially the ozone stuff, because that was really fascinating during the Homechem experiment. Nikki, do we have questions in the queue?
Yes, we do.
Let's do it.
All right. So first question, I think I might be having a reaction to something in my home, but not sure what it is. Who would I call to come test my home?
Cool. Okay, so I actually had a client that I don't think I had when I was doing this last one, who is a perfect example of this. Exactly the same scenario. And what we did is, first of all, you got to do home performance testing, which always is going to involve a blower door test. Everybody say blower door test. Okay, good. So when you're going to ask for a blower door test, and you can go online and search for that, then you're going to know how airtight your house is. And it is possible, and in fact, I've heard a lot of this lately, that the house or condo or apartment, wherever you live, is going to be a lot tighter than you thought it was based on the vintage. And so if it's airtight, which is the case for this client of mine in Indiana, then it's not giving up. The air that gets inside isn't leaving very quickly. And of course, a lot of builders nowadays, even now, when it's required by law, aren't installing ventilation machines, or they're not installing ventilation systems that actually are proven to work, because testing is what this is all about. So we knew that the air tightness was tight. Then you want to know where your air is coming from. And you can use something like a zonal pressure test to do that with. That's while you're running the blower door. You can also use infrared cameras. You can use smoke testing, all kinds of different things. And when I say smoke, I mean like chemical fog, like a rock star, would have in the van. And so you could know where your air is coming from. And in this case, the air was coming from the garage. And you don't want that, because keeping garages is not good. And then you can do something called an air quality test. There's the company that we like to use, the lab, which has the kind of equipment that the Homechem Experiment scientists had, not like the stuff that I own, which is portable. This stuff is like lab quality only. They will send you, our company that we partner with is called Prism Analytics. You can find this thing if you search home air check. They'll send you a little pump and a little vial. And you plug it in, and you can find out what chemicals are existing in your home at that point. They'll do an analysis of the chemicals. And then also they'll test for VOCs that are particular to mold. When mold is in your house, it has like a specific BO. And so they can test for that specific BO. And it turned out that these people didn't have any mold. There was a problem in their house. It was the gasoline and toluene based stuff that was the problem. And so then we were able to really pinpoint what it is that's making the person sick and where it's located. And therefore you can start fixing it. Please do not just go out and start buying, electronic air cleaners to try and fix the problem, because number one, it's a band-aid. If there's bad stuff in your house, we need to get it out. People don't get sick from like perfectly healthy houses. There's always something going on. And so just, do have it tested. You're on the right track for sure. And then move from there once you have actual information, because just buying stuff and trying to plug it in and make it work is going to also have side effects that you could create a worse problem than you have right now.
Great, great. We have another question here. Can you suggest a way for a homeowner to test the effectiveness of a range hood?
Yes. So I show a really easy version of this in the video that I referenced in a second ago, which is on the Tiny Lab, which is our tiny house on wheels. And all you have to do is get like you get a candle, light it on fire, and then let it burn for a few seconds and snuff it out. It's got this trail of smoke coming up. Turn your hood on, and it should be quiet. You should be able to have a conversation underneath it. The main reason that people aren't using hoods is because they're too loud. That's caveman stuff. We should not be there. It's the 21st century. Anyway, you use your smoke and you trace it around the edge of the cooking surface, and all of it should go up into the hood. If it doesn't, then that's like the first indication. There's a bigger question, which is, it's called capture efficiency. And this is something that an organization like HVI, the Home Ventilating Institute, has a standard for that they test in a lab. We are going to be recreating this test in the field on our channel with the help of Dr. Ian Walker from LBNL, which is Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory. But you have to have carbon dioxide in a can. You have to have really special carbon dioxide monitors, which are like, I think he said between $1,000 and $5,000. You have to have potentially a long time, like an hour or an hour and a half, to be able to do this test. And so it's pretty complicated. I'd say start with your making sure that the fan runs in the right direction, making sure that it blows the right amount of air and that it's not impeded somehow, that the damper is not just closed. You can do all that stuff with very basic testing with just literally some smoke from a candle or an incense stick.
All right, great. Next, let's see here. Should I put a portable air cleaner in every room of my house, or can I just buy a better filter for the HVAC system?
Okay, so this person, I'm hoping, is talking about a fan plus a filter and nothing else, right? No UV lights. You can do either. Like there's two different schools of thought. If you live in New York and you live in a giant high-rise that's old and you don't have a central system of ductwork, then absolutely, in the case of cooling, getting like a room by room air conditioner that sits in the window, great, because then you're only worrying about that one room. In fact, there are some air quality controls now that are trying to think about using the whole house's air. And I say house, and of course I mean home, like no matter what kind of building you live in, as like a battery, so that you can diffuse. If you're in the bedroom overnight and the rest of the house isn't being occupied, you got high carbon dioxide building up in that bedroom. All you have to do, you don't have to like have your entire house ventilated. You can just exchange the air from the rest of the house with that room just to dilute it overnight. And then you're, so there's kind of this very elegant interplay that can happen. But your question, the simple answer would be whatever is going to get the job done. If you have a duct system that's good, then do a central filter. And in fact, you know, you want to go with like a wider media. So 2 inches is better than 1 inch. 4 inches deep is better than 2 inches. And it means that you're getting more and more surface area, because the main thing you're going to do when you up your filter, and like, for example, MERV 13, which is what an ultra air ventilating dehumidifier comes with standard, is the right answer in my opinion. You can go down to like MERV 8 is kind of the beginning of, oh, I care about my air quality. Anything lower than MERV 8 is like, I'm just trying to protect the equipment from like rocks and hairballs. So once you start caring about that, you're going to introduce some restriction on the airflow, and you might potentially hurt the equipment that you depend on to heat and cool and dry and ventilate your house. So you just want to make sure that you're like doing it the right way. Rely on an HVAC professional if you can, if you have somebody that you trust, and especially somebody who uses test equipment and test techniques, hang on to them.
Great. All right, here's our last one here. It seems hard to stop buying products with some sort of chemical. Is there something I can buy that will help mitigate as many of the chemicals as possible?
No. So just to review, and again, it's just like, this is a second language for me too. Everything is chemicals. There's no such thing as chemical free. If you buy water, water is chemicals. It doesn't have anything else in it. So it's pure chemicals. So what you really want to do is try and use this 6 classes approach, in our opinion, to get like reasonably, like Arlene Bloom, the scientist that I was talking about who developed the 6 classes approach. When we sat down with her, I was like, so you never drink out of plastic water bottles? You know, can you analyze for me? She was like, oh, you probably got some formaldehyde coming out of your shirt. You have formaldehyde coming out of your mouth. Like, you know, it's whatever. You want to be reasonable. So yes, you're going to be buying things that have chemicals in them, because we live in the 21st century and manufacturers have to find ways to make the things that work at a cost that is affordable for a lot of people. And the only way to do that is to use chemical engineering to develop new, like rubber, you know, if we were all using rubber trees like we used to make everything that was like rubbery, we wouldn't have any more. So we need to develop some new synthetic gasketing materials. You know, we need silicone instead of tar paper, and that's really cool. Well, everything we'll be able to do with computers, making them smaller and smaller, that's all great. So I think that in general, what you want to do is try and follow those 3 steps, which again, we're going to dive into in part 3. Don't bring bad stuff home. And when I say bad stuff, I mean really bad stuff. Just if you're paying attention and like looking at ingredient labels, pat yourself in the back. That's the first step. You don't have to get everything right. When you don't get everything right, because no one can, even the scientists can't do this, then you also need to ventilate and keep it dry in your house. And if you do those 3 things and you're using like reasonable success for all of those, then that's basically what you're looking at when you get a healthy home.
And I think just to add in a little bit there, Corbett, that, you know, if we look at ventilating and we look at filtration and we look at controlling humidity, which all of those will help reduce the harmful contaminants that are in our home, you know, there are certain products like an ultra air ventilating dehumidifier. There is a product that will help with that. And even if, you're looking at your basement or crawl space, if you keep it dry down there and you use a Santa Fe dehumidifier with that MERV 13 filter, that's going to help stop a lot of what's below the home going into the rest of the home, which could be up to 50%. So, there are some things out there, but I don't think overall there's the magic box for everything that is in our homes. We
Right.
can just do the best we can.
And just to reiterate, also a really important aspect as somebody who's like standing outside the manufacturing world, partnering with somebody like Santa Fe who makes stuff, which we need, like we need more manufacturers to care about this topic and to want to, collaborate on getting messaging out and educating people more about the home as a system. They understand just as well as I do that if you take a nice, perfect machine that works perfectly in the factory and then you plug it into a system that doesn't work, then it's not going to function as it was designed to do. And this goes for like something as simple as ductwork. You take a beautiful, piece of equipment that has a fan and a filter in it, and you plug it into ductwork that's too small and takes too many turns or is made out of flexible material and it's like a loosey-goosey everywhere, and it's going to burn up in a short amount of time. And so using this, I'm not going to make any big decisions on surgery for my house until I have test data. And then I need to make sure that I'm using like a systems approach, because there is no, just like Nikki said, there is no silver bullet and there never will be. There is no such thing as that. Don't let anybody try and sell you one of those devices that's going to like solve all your problems. Does not exist. That's just marketing.
And that is, one more question that we do have here is, I'm looking at a UV system for my house. What are your thoughts?
Cool. Okay, so let me take a minute. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time. I'm going to digress for a minute. When we were at Homechem, they had a test chamber that they had built. It's a stainless steel box of a room, and it's airtight, and they can introduce whatever they want into the room chemically. They can introduce particles. They can have like dummies in there doing things like breathing and being and sweating, and kind of simulate these very complicated interactions chemical-wise and chemistry-wise that happen in real life in this very controlled environment where they could see exactly what's happening. When they're done with an experiment and they're going to start a new experiment that has nothing to do with the last experiment, they have to sanitize the room. And the way that they do this is not by using bleach, and it's not using any sprayed on chemicals at all. They don't go in there with sponges. They do what's called nuking the room. And what that means is that they hook up an ozone canister to the air inlet of the room, and they flood the room with ozone. And the ozone destroys every chemical in the room that is possible to destroy that would be measurable in the next experiment. And it'll also kill all of the microorganisms that live in there. And then when they see that the ozone level in the air starts rising, they know that they've hit peak ozone, because the only way for it to be rising in the air is that it's coated all of the surfaces on the walls and the everything else. So that sitting in the chairs thing gets done totally by ozone. Now here's the thing. If you look at an air cleaning device and they're trying to tell you that it doesn't create ozone, number one, or it doesn't create significant amounts of ozone, the way they're testing for that, which is generally not going to be done at a real legit national lab, is that they're going to be testing for ozone in the air near the thing. And how near, right, depends on how much they want to find out. If it's in the air, then something is wrong, because when ozone is created, it immediately wants to mate with some other chemical in the air, so it'll react away, it'll disappear. And it forms all kinds of other secondary radicals, like hydroxyl radical and so on and so forth. And so it'll also stick to things. It's very sticky. So it'll stick to the walls of the ductwork or to the grease and the bearings of the fan. And so if you're sensing it in the air, like that's a lot. So it is definitely creating it. And that's why in general, you just want to try and avoid stuff that's an electronic air cleaner, and that includes UV. By the way, they've done studies, and we're going to have this in the television show, on if you've got air that's moving. Of course, that's the thing about air in ductwork, is it moves. And you're going to put a UV light right here and try and like sanitize all the air as it rushes by at about, it's like hundreds of feet per second. That's pretty fast. you would have to have one that's like 20 feet long to get all of that air, because it has to stay in front of the UV light for a certain amount of time to really do its job. So a lot of that, again, is marketing. And I just, you know, I'm happy to be the bad guy because I don't work for a giant organization. If somebody gets mad at me, they're just going to like give me a thumbs down on my YouTube channel. So just do pay attention to that, and don't let everybody's trying to sell everybody everything right now to solve for this air quality thing. And it's just not going to do a lot of good.
Great, thank you. That is all the questions we have today, Corbett. Thank you, everybody, for reaching out and taking the time to join us today.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.